Thank you. Thank you all very much for inviting me today. Charles Bonnet syndrome became part of my life on the day in 2009 when my mother, Esme, the Esme of Esme's Umbrella, suddenly said, "I do wish these people would get off my sofa." She went on to describe an Edwardian tear-stained street child and a hideous gargoyle-like creature, visions, she called them. And sometimes the whole room or garden morphed into an alien place. Well, I had absolutely no idea what could possibly be wrong with her. She was a fiercely independent 95-year-old who, despite advancing glaucoma, completed the Telegraph cryptic crossword every day. Surely she couldn't be losing her mind. But the word dementia did hang in the air. It was a small paragraph in a newspaper which revealed the cause. But that is where anything positive ended. I could not and still cannot understand why her ophthalmologist had not warned us that Esme's diminishing sight might bring with it silent, vivid, visual hallucinations. After all, forewarned is forearmed. But he refused to discuss CBS. Her optometrist had never heard of it, and her GP said I was being fanciful. So, turning to the internet, I found Dr. Dominic Fitch at King's College London. Dr. Fitch is still the sole globally acknowledged expert and researcher in CBS and is in fact the world's #1 for visual hallucinations of all types. He explained that when someone has lost 60% of sight, the messages from the retina to the visual cortex slow or stop, but the brain does not. The brain fires up and creates its own images, and what is seen depends on which part of the brain is firing at that moment. The sight loss can be from one of the many eye diseases, from stroke, cancer, accident, diabetes, or some other condition which damages the optic nerve. He also explained to me that CBS is not a mental health condition. It's extremely common, but very little known. In fact, we now estimate that in the UK, there are 1 million people living with CBS, children too. At that time, I was writing a health column for the Telegraph, and I began to include this orphan condition, which clearly needed to be adopted. Emails arrived in huge numbers, one of which described how the writer's mother had been admitted to a dementia unit, even though the family considered her completely sane, because she was hallucinating writhing worms and slugs on her food and in her drink. No one had heard of CBS, no reassurance was given. The woman stopped eating and drinking with very tragic consequences. Well, clearly a campaign was needed. So 5 years ago this month, I launched Esme's Umbrella at the UK's House of Commons with Dr. Fitch as my medical advisor. Since then, I have been raising awareness, sourcing funding for research, and creating a CBS community globally, I hope, for healthcare professionals too. And it's still only me. For some people, CBS is tolerable and even enjoyable, but, to quote Dr. Dominic Fitch, 1/3 of people who experience CBS have the more debilitating form, characterized by hallucinations that are much more frequent, last longer, and are more intrusive. The people that experience this also tend not to have been told about CBS before the hallucinations start. This is what happened to Esme. And there are still far too many people living in frightened silence, thinking wrongly that they have developed a mental health issue. every patient with diminishing sight deserves that warning, because CBS can bring additional problems, falling over whilst trying to avoid the sudden appearance of a tiger, flames, or gushing water. Being unable to differentiate between what is real and what is not leads people to become housebound. And horrifying images spawn suicidal thoughts. The loneliness felt by people with CBS is about being isolated in a world of uninvited images, which it is extremely difficult to explain. Lockdown has confirmed that isolation, stress, and fever exacerbate the episodes of CBS, and people report that the images seen have become much more frightening. Peer support offers that all-important reassurance, and my telephone chat service, called Esme's Friends, gives people with CBS, their caregivers and families too, the chance to exchange experiences and coping strategies. And I know that I've spoken to Peter about possibly starting one in Ireland, which would be great. If the hallucinations are intolerable, there is now medication, but it's not CBS specific. You can find it in Dr. Fitch's recently published SHAPED study. I'm very happy to say that interest in CBS research is growing. We have seen a hopeful result from transcranial direct current stimulation to switch off the firing cells, but there are many more hurdles to jump before that can be prescribed. Cardiff and Manchester universities have begun CBS projects, as has Oxford University, and I am very proud to say that its research will be funded partly by Esme's umbrella. Papers about the impact of COVID-19 on CBS and the prevalence of CBS in children have been published by Professor Maria Musagi. Part 2 of her work will look at the effect of CBS on children and on their families. Discovering that the guide dog of Dr. Amit Patel was warning him before a CBS episode occurred was intriguing. What is she detecting? Research by the UK's medical detection dogs will tell us. And finally, last year, with the help of Professor Andrew Dick in the UK and Dr. August Kohlenbrander in the USA, sorry, I think I seem to have pressed something, I hope not, I successfully persuaded the World Health Organization to give CBS a coding in ICD-11. Healthcare services worldwide will now have to provide a pathway for diagnosis, treatment, and support, because 300 years after the birth of Charles Bonnet, no one should be left to cope alone with what he called the theatre of the mind. Thank you very much.